Hello. How's it going?
It's all right. It's all right. I look like a hipster today. I'm vibing.
Nah, I'm digging it.
My
I'm digging it.
glasses on and yeah.
Little beanie. So it's a look. I love it. I definitely did
Mm,
not try as hard, but give it a
That's
shot.
perfectly fine.
So look at
Your
this.
necklace
A
is cute.
blue scrunchie with a red sweater doesn't make any sense, but I'm
I
comfy, so
mean,
that's all
it's
that
not like you're
matters.
really leaving your house.
You're right.
Yeah. So
I'm Shivani,
I'm Miranda.
and we are far from normal. And this is episode 32, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Yeah.
Good job.
So today we were thinking about trying to give, or like, you're, oof. Okay, let me reword that. Today we were thinking about talking about racism, prejudice, and race, and everything in between. And yeah, Miranda, would you like to kind of get into that?
Yeah. So I did some research, obviously, because I wanted to at least like present some ideas. But there's also things that like I am gonna have implicit biases. And I am gonna have certain things shaped by the way I've grown up. Um, and also because I didn't do like super thorough research. So I just wanted to do that, say that as a precursor. And if anyone has any questions or disagrees or anything, please feel free to reach out to us and we will try to either like fix what we were trying to say because we maybe just didn't word it or apologize for our misspeaking. So basically, I just did some research about the differences between prejudice, discrimination, and racism. I can give the exact definitions that I found, but again, one of the oh, sorry, I have to sneeze. That's gonna be on our podcast. Love it. Okay. One of the big things is that people have very different definitions, I think, from what I've seen in media and people I talk to and those kind of things. So I wanted to try to find some sort of definition off Google that we can use at least for the discussion, regardless of if it's necessarily the objective, accurate description, but something that at least we can apply subjectively. So that's a lot of thoughts. Do you want to input anything or do you want me to just go ahead?
I guess I could just add this too. I definitely could have done a lot more research, so I am sorry beforehand. I was totally prepared to you know, just throw myself into a bunch of research, but a bunch of things came up, and it is the last week of Black History Month, so we really wanted to get it out there and start that discussion and conversation. So I'm gonna do my best with the limited knowledge I have, and yeah, I agree with Miranda's. Race and racism and prejudice is very subjective, so there's a lot to dig in through right there.
Yeah,
So yeah, go for it.
cool. Okay, so I'm going to just give the three definitions I found for racism, prejudice, and discrimination. Again, subjective, like we said, but at least we can use them to build our conversation. So, racism, according to a website that I found, is when you believe your race is superior to others and you have power. So you have to be in the race that has power over other races. Prejudice refers to a negative emotion, whether implicit or actually explicit, against people from other social groups, racial groups, etc. And it leads to discrimination, which is inappropriate treatment of people because of whatever they actually identify as or what you perceive them identifying as. So, like, example of a perception would be like assuming someone's gay when they're not necessarily. Um, and then there's both like overt behaviors and covert behaviors. So there's gonna be things that you don't realize that you're doing and things that you do realize you're doing. One of those being like microaggressions, which we can talk about a little bit as we go forward, and like indirect things, subtle things, yada yada. Do
Got it.
you have anything?
Um, no, I had a thought.
Mhm.
A lot of times when like people talk about like prejudice or like discrimination or stereotyping, there's a lot of overlap. I feel like when they talk about it, there is no clear definition. I know that you like mentioned that like when that example of like someone deciding that another individual is gay just because of how they look, and like I feel like probably shouldn't be saying I feel like, I think, I think that people, they just don't really understand the definitions, or there really isn't an established definition,
Yeah.
because it's all very, very, it's very like minute detailed. Like the differences between the terms
Mhm.
are very small, very, very, very small. And there's a line that no one can clearly identify. And I know with the limited research that I did before this, there are 12 different types of racism that I have looked into a little bit. I can name them if you want me to.
Okay.
So at least when I first started like thinking about racism, I figured I kind of had that same definition that you were talking about, just like superiority, and like that being just like the main premise behind like racism, and thinking that you're superior than another person, like another race or whatever. But there's a lot of different things within racism. So I think that's why there are so many categories. But
Okay.
categories are representational racism, ideological racism, discursive racism, interactional racism, institutional racism, structural racism, systemic racism, scientific slash pseudoscientific racism, anti-Black racism, overt versus covert racism, othering, and implicit bias, which probably isn't, I don't know if that's considered racism, but it's under the same category.
Okay. Yeah.
But
Do you want to expand on
yeah,
any of them? Because I know you watched like a little bit of a video that discussed some of them. Is there anything that you want to add about them, or do you want to just give people the terms?
I'm gonna give people the terms because yes, I didn't have as much time as I'd like
Mhm.
to really delve into that. But
Yeah.
for you guys just to like, know there are many, many different terms. So yeah, go for it.
I think so. I'm gonna ask you a question, and then I'll tell you what I think the reason is. But I want to hear what you think. So this is about like racism and white privilege. So I we had a conversation about white privilege or just privilege in general at Butler recently, and we one of our big things was like, why does it take people so long to acknowledge their privilege? And I was curious to see if you had any response to that. Obviously you didn't have to do any research on it, and I was just curious. So.
So your question is why I think white people aren't so, I don't know, like what don't really acknowledge our white privilege. Is that what you're asking?
Mhm.
Um, that's a good question. I mean, I think I need some time to like gather my thoughts. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I something I kind of concluded relatively recently is I think, I mean, obviously you don't want to give up your privilege. There is that aspect, like you appreciate being where you are, and like those kind of things. I also think we've talked about this before, but I think all people want to be good people. So when you tell them that they have white privilege or that they're being racist or something like that, they kind of deny it and shut down and
Mm,
get defensive, as opposed to like looking inside and trying to grow from it.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Sparked a memory from some of the research that I did. So, back sometime in history, I'm going to get my dates mixed up, but when slavery was still prominent, I think this was probably in the 18th century, there was a group of white Protestant pro slavery evangelicals that, within religion, within like theology, um, it doesn't support slavery, but because they are able to interpret religion in their own
mhm.
ways, they try to make sense out of slavery and make it justify their actions for
Yeah.
treating, blacks like as inferior. And so I think that just kind of like ties in like with the present. Like they want to believe that they're doing the right thing, so they use whatever they can to justify their actions. And I think it's kind of like based off like what I mean, kind of like going off your point of like they want to believe that they're doing the right thing, and that they don't want to like acknowledge their hypocrisy, because no one likes to admit that they're wrong. Like
Yeah.
you want to be like, no, I'm doing it right, and like I'm a good person, and it
Yeah.
can be really hard and for people to do that. I mean, I've noticed that with like really minute things in like my own life, just like well, mid-conversation realizing that I'm on the wrong side of the argument, but I'm
Yes,
too
I've
and
done
I'm
that.
too prideful to like actually be like, all right,
Mhm,
I'm wrong. So I just keep arguing the wrong points. And I
mhm,
feel like in that same sense, they do that with like a bigger issue with
yeah,
racism. And I think this is just my opinion, but like I think if we're ever going to get past that, we're just going to have to like learn as like a collective how to be more like less ego driven and more vulnerable and being okay with just saying how like exposing yourself a little bit and being okay with that. And I feel like in like the community and like in not the community but like in the state, like the situation that we're in now, it's almost hard to do that, especially with like social media, just because you can get canceled real quick
okay,
if you admit, oh my goodness, well I have like I have biases and stuff like that. You can't just say that, like people are not gonna let that fly. Like you'd have to do some, I don't know. I think this is just like how I see it, but like if I notice that like something's wrong within myself, I try to correct it not just by like saying that it's a problem, but I also do research and I try to do as much as
yeah,
I can on my own part. But not everyone does that. And
right,
it's kind of like a subjective thing for like other people to be okay with that, if that
yeah,
makes any sense.
yeah.
But,
My
mhm,
roommate kind of talks about a concept like that. Like, I think admitting things is a first good step, and I think obviously I understand when people get upset and aren't willing to educate them because at a point like you can't educate all the white privileged people. You have to like they have to educate themselves a little bit. But like my roommate was talking about how like there was a psychology study where someone acted in like prejudiced ways, and one way was explicit, so they knew they were doing it. Um, and like it didn't necessarily say they were trying not to, so that might affect it. But there's one that was explicit where they knew it, and there's one that was implicit, so they didn't know what they were doing. And all of the like surveyors and respondents didn't care as much about the implicit and were upset about the explicit. So
mhm. Two things. One, I think I know what your roommate was talking about because I think I did something similar in my psychology class too. We had to take a survey on like explicit and implicit bias, and I had to like write a paper about it.
yeah.
And second thing, have you noticed any explicit or implicit bias in like your own life? You don't have to answer that, but I was just curious. But
Yeah, we've also been talking about that in my ethics class right now. The Harvard implicit bias test, is that what you're talking about?
yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
took.
Yeah, I posted about that on the Instagram as well.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed a lot of implicit biases that I didn't want to admit. Because again, like I said earlier, like you don't want to be like I'm racist because like that's like you're evil. Um,
Mhm.
but there's things that are like ingrained in us by society. Like I posted today about the media thing. Like black men are like portrayed as like violent in movies. And so like or like drug dealers or like stuff like that. So like when I was younger, I used to like unconsciously like be more scared of people who are black because of that. Um, which obviously I'm ashamed of, and it's obviously something that needs work. But I do think acknowledging your biases is more important than just sitting there in ignorance. Because
Yeah.
when you're in ignorance, you just continue to like, especially if you're white privilege, right? You continue to get like grow and get different positions of power, and then you educate people in other ignorant ways, and it never gets out of the system. So
Mhm. No, I totally agree. I think I had like a similar childhood. I think it's just because the way the black community was portrayed in media in like the early years, we all sort of had like an implicit bias whenever it came to like that in like real life, because they usually were associated with like violence and all these
mhm,
crazy things that never should have happened, but just happened that way. And
yeah,
I don't know if it was some sort of agenda on someone else's part, if like there was some white privilege and sort of agenda in that too, because like Hollywood likes to do that. They like to send messages out that way, and it's not always the greatest.
yeah,
What was I gonna go say with that? I mean, yeah, I've noticed a lot of like implicit bias in my own life too, just with the way I've been brought up. Also, like in India, the colorism is a thing. So like,
Okay.
you know, darker skin toned Indians are probably treated less, that like inferior compared to lighter skin toned Indians.
It's the white privilege thing. Like you want to be as white as you can. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and it's so funny because like I remember, not funny, but it's just weird.
Right.
But it's just like I remember like being asked that question for the first time, and like all these memories of just times when like I had like family or relatives point things out that were just so biased and so like implicitly like racist, and
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my goodness, like how did I not catch on to that? But like it's just like when you're that young, it just kind of gets like ingrained into your like
Yeah.
subconscious, and like you don't realize that it's there until like someone calls it out, which isn't the most comfortable thing either. So it's like it's really hard to like backtrack and like reverse all of that conditioning, if that makes any sense. But yeah, I know like for a long time that I sort of had that implicit bias too, that like lighter skinned people were like better. And like I like remember having family being like, oh, don't stay out in the sun too long, you're gonna get dark. And I'm like, now I'm like, why was that a problem? Like, what if I get dark? Like that's normal. It's fine. But it's crazy.
Sorry, there's
Um,
running water in the background, so I'm just.
oh, you're good. You're good. Yeah. Did you have anything else you wanted to add on to that?
I think the stereotypes, the prejudice, those kind of things, with the implicit bias, like I talked about this again on the post today, like that can lead into very dangerous situations when people with those biases get into power. Like we have incidents like the George Floyd stuff where like people have the biases and just like um, racial profiling, like they assumed because he's a black man, like he was all automatically dangerous. I don't know what else to add to that, but that's definitely a concern.
It is. And it's like I always come back to like the same question of just like, how do you fix that? Like, how do you fix like centuries of just like
Yeah.
white privilege and like implicit and like explicit bias and stereotypes, and it's probably going to take centuries more to like completely get over that. But yeah, I don't really have much to add to that either. It's just so crazy to me, and like I still feel like I'm trying to, even though like we're still talking about this and we have been talking about this for a long time, I still feel like I'm trying to acknowledge certain biases within myself, and I'm not exactly sure if I'm over them. I want to be over them, but like how can you be how can you know for sure? I don't know.
It's hard to combat like
It
prejudice
is.
and bias within you. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. What's your sorry, go ahead. Wait, were you gonna say something?
No.
Oh, okay. How would you define unity?
Ooh, I have no idea.
Me either. But I mean like if you could like just
Unity,
come up.
like unity is not really the same thing as allyship,
Ooh, what do you
right?
think is the difference?
I feel like wouldn't unity more be like everyone's in this together sort of framework?
I think so. I mean, how would you define allyship? Oh,
I feel like
how
allyship
would
is
allyship?
someone
Yeah.
who's outside of the situation but giving support.
Mm, okay. Makes sense. Makes sense.
Um, like in choir, we're doing a song composed by a Black woman,
Mhm.
and we're singing it as allies and not like really. I don't know. Like one of the words is like we are one, but like we're not unit. I feel like saying we're unified is like diminishing their struggles. Like saying that the white allies are unified with the Black individuals is, I don't know, it seems inaccurate to me because it's like we don't know half of what people have been through and we can't actually unify ourselves because we aren't them. We're allies. I don't know.
Hmm. So what do you think
That makes
it
any
would
sense?
take? Yeah, no, I understand. What do you think it would take to get to that next level of unity then? Do you think that maybe just like the Black community like raising their voices for like the next however many years, maybe like a whole century would be needed before we can actually consider maybe unifying and seeing each other as one, or do you think we should start
Yeah.
doing that now?
I don't. I think allyship is important right now, and I think unifying in other things is important. Like if the argument isn't about racism, obviously we can unify with someone who isn't white. But I think if we say that unification is possible now, we're overlooking a lot of things. Because there's so much prejudice right now, and so many things. Like we talked about with Donovan. Like I don't think I don't. If we try to unify now, I think there's too much prejudice, and we're not. People say that they want to unify, but I don't think. I don't. I don't. It doesn't seem. I don't know. Sorry.
No, you're totally okay. I mean, this kind of like connects to like one of the other questions I think we were thinking about talking about. Was that like I think you asked like, do you think representation in any sort of way of like the Black community is a good thing, and
Mhm.
if there's such thing as like bad representation, even though
Right.
like they're trying to like represent the Black community.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, there's a couple of facets to it. I think one of them is when it's just a bunch of white people, like just like handpicking, which individuals to like use as representation. That's bad, obviously. And I also think we talked about this at Butler again recently. I think representation is good, but I don't think it's something that we should be like, oh look, there's a Black person, they did good, we can move on now. Like it's got to build. Like can't just have a stereotypical like comedic relief Black guy, and you can't just have like I don't know. Like there's got to be like intersectionality and different descriptions of Black people because not every person fits a stereotype.
Oh yeah, for
Oh,
sure,
yeah.
for sure. Something that I like thought about was that like like how starting to like raise like Black voices and starting to like incorporate them into like more of like media and trying to like
Mhm.
break those barriers.
Yeah.
Um, and they're adding more of like the Black community narrative into like different shows just about like the Black community or like Black families and stuff like that. So like it makes me like wonder because sometimes like this might just be like me observing things wrong, but like sometimes I've noticed that like they'll make a whole show about a Black family, but then they won't necessarily like add any white people in there. It'll just be about the Black family, which I think kind of like
Okay.
goes off your point of like we're not ready for like I guess
So it's either one
unification
or
in
the
that
other
way.
kind of thing.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's just like they're trying to make is that I'm wording this really poorly. They're
Representation.
trying to make up for all that time they didn't have a voice. So
Okay.
now it's just like primarily them as the focus. And so I
Yeah.
feel like it might take a long time before they can like merge the two like just like about like the Black community narrative with like all the Hollywood stuff to mush that together. Does that make any sense?
No, it does. It actually relates, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to bring up this concept, but it relates a lot to it. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll see how it goes.
Nervous.
Like I think stuff like that is meant to, bring equality, and you have to take steps where you specifically help a certain group in order to reach equality. And shoot, I don't know the difference between equity and equality, and I should because it's a
So
big
should
thing. What? Are you
So
gonna
should
yell?
I like remember talking about it and I just can't.
Yeah.
I can't get the definitions right.
So, I apologize to anyone listening to this because we don't know our shit. I'm sorry. Um, but basically, like those steps are necessary to reach the equality. And I think it's become like a big thing, and like I don't know, the white community. There's not really a white community, I hope. I don't think there is. I feel like it's very interspersed, but that's not the point. That's become a big like topic in like different white households or different white people about how like it's perceived by some people as like Black privilege. Have you heard that used as a term before?
Black privilege?
Hmm.
I don't think so. Where have you heard it?
Kind of the same concept as like reverse racism.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
like say like Harvard has a program that makes it easier for Black Americans to, not easier for them to get acceptance, but scholarships are like different things in order to reach equality, right? Some white individuals think that that is unfair to them because they aren't getting that extra push, but the push is in order to reach equality. So
Yeah, I can understand why they would think that. And it like kind of connects to like I think our was it our previous episode that we talked about like diverse feminism and
mhm.
like how we were talking about like just because we have like we could have had the chance of having like a woman as a president, would that have like, you know, taken in her like qualifications or whatnot.
Mhm.
um I think it's like the same concept, but it's like a little more tricky because it's not tricky, it's about like the same level of like, you know, feminism and like racism. um I understand where they're coming from, but like how would you get equality otherwise? Like there's a like if you're thinking about like legal policies and like, you know, like different governmental policies, you'd have to take some sort of step to like
Yeah.
stop that systemic racism. So I definitely think it's something that was needed. um but I'm not sure how many people think that. Like, is that just like the minority opinion, or do like most people think that? So like
Mm,
I don't know. I feel like that's really tricky to answer
yeah.
just because I don't have all the information. And
Right.
also, I don't know how, like, what the process is for, um, like, allowing more of like the more people who are Black into like a specific format program. Um, yeah, I could see how they could think that, but like, I feel like they're missing like the bigger picture of
Right.
like equality. So
Especially because like even now, even with those programs, it's still majority white people at these schools. So like
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um
Yeah, that's true.
yeah. Do we want to go into reverse racism since I started on it?
You could try. I really,
Okay.
really, really, really wish I did like more research on this, but
Okay.
like we wanted to get this episode out, so we're gonna do our best.
Okay.
So I'm gonna make you go first, though.
Yeah, sure.
What do you think?
So I'm gonna go with what I found on Google, and then I'm gonna go into my opinion. So what I found on Google, okay, so it's from a liberal site talking about what they think conservatives who believe this think. So it could be inaccurate. However, the argument that they are saying people believe is that, um, sorry, reverse racism is when people get offended that aren't included in spaces made by minorities. So like different, there's like, I don't know, the NAACP. Like white people get offended because they aren't given like some of the funding that goes into NAACP, and so they think it's racist because it's helping this one group and not helping them. Um, And a lot of people who say that, according to this website, think that minorities don't have it that bad and that white people also have hard situations, which is accurate to an extent. Like white people do also have hard situations. However, like people of color have it even harder. Like if people of color were born, like say someone who's lower class white and someone who's lower class African American, like even though being lower class for both is hard, it's going to be harder for the African American individual. So that is what the internet said. And then I will share my opinion. And my opinion is more so, I think there is prejudice against white people, but I don't think it's reverse racism, because I think racism, again, like the definition earlier, is when people hold power. And I don't think we are in a spot as our country where Black Americans have the power that white Americans do. But I do think like there are stereotypes and prejudice against white people and stuff like that. Like, what's a good, I don't know, like white people drink a lot of Starbucks. That's not really offensive, but that's what I can think of off the top of my head. Like those kind of things. And I think those are worth acknowledging as long as you're not trying to overshadow or diminish the opposite viewpoint.
Mm-hmm. Got it. No, that makes sense. Makes sense. Shoot, I had so many thoughts and it just like went down the
Sorry.
drain. No. Like, no, you had a lot of really good points. I guess I can start off by saying that like reverse racism. I almost feel like I think I asked my mom about this, and just like people in my family, and because like they're immigrants and like have had like experience from like other parts of the world, they do believe that like reverse racism can exist
Okay.
because they've been racist to other people too, or like they acknowledge that like they, you know, might have thought like certain things about other people despite being a minority themselves. And it's not that, yeah. And I feel like it varies across the world too, because we're also very like, yeah, narrowed down to like what we see in the US. And that can be very different from like racism experienced in like Brazil. Which, fun fact, I remember my professor telling me about in Brazil, I think, they consider like the term black as offensive. So they have a different term. Like, whereas we would use black to like address, you know, the black community, and that's like considered respectful here. In Brazil, that's more of like offensive and more of like a slur sort of thing, and that's it kind of puts them down in that sense. Like the terms are different.
I feel like that's very like we've switched a lot too in the US, where it's like different words and
yeah. No, I remember like when like I was just starting to like, you know, look into like the movement and like do my research. I was really confused about that because like there were some people saying that it's like you should use the term black and you should maybe or use the term African American, and then like this is real stupid, but I didn't realize like African American was like it was just within the US, like African American. And I never like thought about it like that because I would refer to like all like Black individuals as like African American, even though they weren't from America. And I was like, oh shoot, like there's others.
And some Black individuals aren't from Africa either.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why you can't say that to like someone in France, like, oh, you're African American. They'll be like, no, like I'm not American. Like, yeah. But yeah, that was just a random fact. But where was I going with this?
No idea.
Yeah, I think reverse racism does agree more to an extent outside of the US, but maybe within the US it's a little harder to make a good position on that just because of like the historical context. And I feel like that's why I think that's the reason why so many people have problems acknowledging that there might be a point to reverse racism in the US. Don't come for me for that. I'm just just thinking out loud. But maybe it's just because they fail to acknowledge the historical context when they say that, oh, reverse racism does exist, and that, you know, like maybe the person who's white is like, oh, well, you know, I'm not getting treated as equally as the Black community. It's just because they're not getting kind of how like I was saying in earlier, not getting like the bigger picture. They're not really understanding the whole historical context behind it and not really like taking that into consideration. But I don't know. That's a thought.
I think I actually realized based on our discussion what equity versus equality is, and I might not be right, but I remember seeing like a kid by the fence thing. And like equality was when they both got the same like box to stand on or something like that, and one of the kids was shorter or something. I don't remember exactly. They both got the exact same size box to stand on, and so like one of them was above the fence and the other was like below the fence. And then the equity was where they had different sizes of the box, but so it made them at the same level, height wise.
Oh, so wait, equality is when you give them both the same box, but one's still taller than the other.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good visual. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. So like equity is what we're aiming for at the moment. Mm-hmm. And equality we can't really think about equality until we're at the same level.
Yeah.
It's basically what's going on there. That's a good way to put it. I think that would be really helpful for people who don't really understand like what's going on here. It's just like we're trying to like even out like the play, like the even out the field.
Yep.
Words. I like that. That's a really good visual.
Yeah. We're almost out of time. Do you have anything that you want to talk about before we log off?
I don't think so. I think I covered most of everything I want to say. We might do another episode in the future with more research just because I feel terrible not having as much research and like, notes as I wanted to. Really?
Yeah, it wasn't bad.
I felt awful. I was like, I need to know more. And I hate not knowing what I need to know. And the thing is like, you don't know what you don't know, but
yeah. Obviously we didn't know exact definitions, but we got there, and what we said hopefully didn't make us sound like assholes. So I think we're good.
Hopefully. Feel free to like leave comments or, feedback if you guys have any about this episode. We'd totally love to hear it. And I'd love to do more research about it because that's fun.
Call us out if we said anything wrong.
Yeah. No hate though. We still love you. We still love you. Yes. I mean, we can have a civil discussion about this and we love it. All right. If you guys have any questions, comments, feedback, you can email us at farfromnormalpodcast2020@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram where we're most active at farfromnormalpodcast. We also have a Google survey on our Instagram so you can leave more questions, comments, and feedback. You'd also be anonymous, so that'd be cool too. Mm-hmm. And I think that's about it. All of our links are also in the description, and hit that notification bell and like and subscribe. Hopefully I didn't forget anything, but we're on Spotify too, so listen to us there, and we hope you have a great day.
Love you guys. Thank you for listening.
Love you. Bye.